Basically, intermittent fasting has become very popular these days, made mostly popular by David Sinclair. However, long before David Sinclair was talking about, basically before he was talking about intermittent fasting, there was a gentleman named Ori Hofmekler. And I bought his first book, The Warrior Diet, from a company called Dragon Door Publishing. People might know that. Also Hardstyle and things like that. So because this is the guy that had the first popular diet that involved intermittent fasting. And I'm going to talk about why I don't do intermittent fasting anymore a little bit later, what I do instead of intermittent fasting, and what I think is safer than intermittent fasting. But what I want to make sure that people understand is I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not a nurse, I'm not a dietitian, I'm not a chiropractor. If you have a medical question, I'm not a medical practitioner. So if you have a medical question or a medical concern, talk to a licensed medical provider. I'm not one. Find someone that is. So Ori Hofmekler is a visionary who is in many ways ahead of his time. He brings his own unique vision for how to achieve optimal health and longevity through understanding the principles of biological stress. Remember the term hormesis, okay? I'm not going to talk too much about hormesis, but that's what this is. There's exercise-induced hormesis, dietary-induced hormesis, climate-induced hormesis, etc. So based on a mix of hard data and intuition gained from years of studying nutrition, he extends current scientific research in insightful and unexpected ways. As he says here, it's time to revise the definition of nutrition. Now, this is another great book he does. This book deals primarily with hormesis. This is called The 7 Principles of Stress. This talks about a lot of the stuff that Dr. Sinclair talks about, but before Dr. Sinclair was talking about it, okay? So, this is the Warrior Diet, Unlock Your Muscle Gene, the Anti-Estrogenic Diet, okay? These are different blogs, articles, recipes. This is his homepage, of course. Couldn't find a Wikipedia article for him. I don't know why. Now I'll move on. So this is from Live Strong. This is Live Strong's Guide to the Warrior Diet. And it says, there appears to be no shortage of intermittent fasting methods. There's the 1 meal a day diet, alternate day fasting, eat, stop, eat, and so on. The Warrior Diet is another type of intermittent fasting diet that claims to follow the eating patterns of ancient warriors. The diet's founder claims it has many benefits, including easy weight loss. Now, a lot of this is backed up by scientific evidence. The problem was it wasn't backed up by scientific evidence when he published the book, back when he published it through Dragon Door. But what that shows is that he was more or less right about a lot of this. So what is the Warrior Diet? The Warrior Diet was created in the early 2000s by Ori Hofmekler, who was a member of the Israeli Special Forces. He wrote the book, The Warrior Diet, based on his experiences, observations, and interpretation of historical data dating back to the ancient Greeks and Romans. In the book, he describes this eating pattern as more of a lifestyle than a diet, with the goal of being to improve the way people eat, feel, perform, and look by triggering their survival instincts. So in a lot of ways, if you remember when I talked about hormesis, what happens is these things literally activate like sirtuins and activate what Dr. Sinclair calls your survival genes. And it encourages things like DNA repair and stuff like that. So Hofmekler says that humans are not meant to eat 3 meals a day. And now he's not the only one. The other guy that says that is Walter Longo. Now, I don't really agree with this, and I'll get into that later. But a day that they function more efficiently when eating in a manner of ancient warriors, consuming very few calories during the day, followed by a big feast each night. In this plan, there is a 20-hour under-eating period. In Dr. Walter Longo's longevity diet, there's only a 12-hour under-eating period, and also, the periodic fasting. Think 10 to 15% of your daily calories and a 4-hour window of overeating during which you can eat one large meal. Okay. In the book, Hofmekler states that obesity, diabetes, and other common diseases in today's society stem from eating too many meals during the day. He also claims that the human body works better when people eat sparingly during the day. Okay, what can you eat on the Warrior Diet? The Warrior Diet is broken up into 3 week-long phases. Phase 1, the detox. Phase 2, higher fat. Phase 3, carb cycling. So during your 20-hour fasting window, you can only eat and drink the following: beverages, water, coffee, and tea, no sugar, small amount of milk, vegetable juice, carrot, parsley, celery, raw fruits, peeled apples, banana, kiwi, berries, grapefruit, oranges, papaya, mango, peach, pineapple, melon, grapes, and watermelon are allowed only after a high-protein dinner. So higher sugared juices are only, and higher sugared fruits and things like that are only allowed after a high-protein dinner. And that goes with food combining, and he discusses food combining in the Warrior Diet. So vegetables: tomatoes, peppers, onions, cucumber, mushrooms, sprouts, zucchini, carrots, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, spinach, okra, spaghetti, squash. Plain yogurt, eggs, clear soup, broth, salad with mixed greens and vegetables. Okay. During the 4-hour feeding window, you are allowed the following for your main meal: salad, steamed vegetables, beans and legumes, grains. Foods to eat during phase 2, like the first phase of this diet. The second phase lasts 1 week and allows the same foods during your 4-hour overeating phase, though you are allowed the following: salad, as described in phase 1, steamed vegetables, as in phase 1, 4 to 6 ounces of protein, chicken, fish, turkey, lean, blah, 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 1 handful of nuts. Foods to eat during phase 3. This week-long phase alternates. Now, when I bought the Dragon Door book, it didn't have these phases. It simply was under-eating and overeating. Under-eating during the day, which involved eating very low-carbohydrate vegetables and maybe some coffee or tea or something like that, but no high-protein, no high-carbohydrate foods during the day, and which would, of course, activate the nutrient sensing pathways that encourage DNA repair, but it wasn't done like phases like this. Okay, it was just done with the undereating and overeating. On high carb days, your undereating schedule will remain the same as above. Blah blah blah. So corn, sweet potatoes, these are for high carb days. Butternut squash, pumpkin, peas, potatoes, barley, rice, oats, quinoa, pasta, bread. On the high protein days, your undereating schedule remains the same. During the 4-hour eating window, you can eat a salad with oil and vinegar followed by 4 to 6 ounces of protein. Foods to avoid on the Warrior Diet: highly processed foods, fried foods, artificial sweeteners, chemical additives, foods containing hormones, beer, and other alcoholic beverages, except for 1 glass of wine at dinner. Can you lose weight on the Warrior Diet? Yes, blah, blah, blah. Warrior Diet versus 1 meal a day. This is not really important. I'm going to move on. So this is another guide to the Warrior Diet. What is the Warrior Diet? The Warrior Diet is essentially a type of intermittent fasting. Yes, you read that correctly. For those 4 hours, nothing is truly off limits, although he has plenty of recommendations on what to avoid or indulge in sparingly during these mega meals. Does the Warrior Diet work? In his book, Ori goes into a lot of detail about dematerialization and the dissolution of the self, blah, blah, blah. But the gist of it is that primordial man in the wild did not have a refrigerator full of beer and pizza in his cave dwelling. In fact, during much of his life, he was probably quite hungry. Okay, the benefits of the Warrior Diet. The fact that intermittent fasting is one great way to aid weight loss is undisputed. But there are many other additional benefits associated with the Warrior Diet. These benefits include some protection against heart disease and cancer, as well as other health conditions like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. Okay, what is being on the Warrior Diet like? Okay. The book talks a lot about mental health and its role in weight gain. Those with eating disorders like binge eating may struggle with self-control around food. Ori mentions that after adapting the mind to adhere to a fasting window, our eating habits change intellectually, all from the inside out. Okay, how to start the warrior diet, quitting your favorite latte, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And remember, you can read these things on your own. They're all linked in the description. The most important foods to focus on include raw foods, fresh fruits and vegetables, and derivatives like juice, salads, and smoothies. Protein, surprisingly enough, Ori is a vocal advocate of animal protein. He cites something called the protein utilization triangle in his book, which helps us visualize the way that these compounds work together if eaten at eaten together. Okay, if eaten at the correct times. Complex carbohydrates, things like corn, potatoes, rice, barley, and other starches. In a lot of ways, Ori Hofmekler was kind of like the first liver king, except Ori Hofmekler's authentic. And what Ori Hofmekler recommends actually has been shown to work. Water, this one is obvious. Ori encourages you to stay hydrated, especially throughout your fasting windows. Food with high glycemic, this is to avoid, don't eat foods that are high on the glycemic index. Don't eat a lot of processed foods. Tips for the warrior diet plan: start with a mild, subtle tasting food, blah, blah, blah. You can read this on your own. And I'm going to move on. Now, this is very well summary of the warrior diet. Okay, and so let's see what we got going on here. What the experts say, the warrior diet is a stricter type of intermittent fasting, alternating between 20 hours of under-eating and 4 hours of an unlimited intake. What can you eat? Okay, this just goes again over what you can eat. What you need to know: during the 20-hour fasting period, you should consume only minimal calories. When it's time for your feeding window, you can essentially eat however much of whatever you want until the 4 hours are over. Now, there was also a diet called the Fast 800, which is very similar to this, but far more restrictive, which is an 800-calorie diet. Far more restrictive than the warrior diet even, but it claims to have all these great benefits. But I'm going to show you what I think works just as good without all the hubbub. As people know, I am an advocate of calorie restriction. However, I'm an advocate of calorie restriction with optimal nutrition, and I'm going to get into that later. People have heard me talk about this before when I talked about Roy Walford's diet, and I believe that the optimal nutrition part actually plays more of a role than the caloric restriction part. So there may be blah, blah, blah. Okay, different forms of calorie restriction. The National Institute of Health says calorie restriction is a consistent pattern of reducing average daily calorie intake, while fasting focuses on reducing frequency of eating. A fasting diet may include calorie restriction during non-fasting times, but it also may not. Time-restricted feeding, meals are taken only within a limited number of hours. That would be what the essentially what the warrior diet is. Alternate day fasting, no or minimal calories can be consumed one day and eating is unrestricted the next. That's like the Fast 800. 5-2 eating plan. Eating is unrestricted for 5 straight days with 2 days of restricted caloric intake. Periodic fasting. This is so essentially periodic fasting. Caloric intake is restricted for various times, such as 5 days in a row, once a month, while all other days are unrestricted. So the longevity diet, Walter Longo's longevity diet, is a blending of periodic fasting as well, whereas caloric intake is restricted, as well as time-restricted feeding with the 12-hour restriction, 12-hour feeding window. What's the evidence? Some studies suggest that calorie restriction may have health benefits for humans. For example, the National Institute on Aging conducted a clinical trial called Comprehensive Assessment of Long-Term Effects of Reducing Intake of Energy. In this study, 218 young and middle-aged normal weight or moderately overweight adults were randomly divided into 2 groups. Now, I've gone over this before, so I'm going to try and skim by it. People in the experimental group were told to eat 25% fewer calories per day than they regularly consumed for 2 years, while those in the control group followed their usual diet. The first group failed to meet the target, but managed to reduce their caloric intake by 12%, and this is what's important. Only 12% made a big difference. Doing that, though, was enough to maintain, on average, a 10% loss in body weight over 2 years. In addition, those in the calorie restriction group had reduced risk factors like lower blood. They accomplished having lower blood pressure and lower cholesterol, and less issues with diseases such as diabetes, stroke, and heart disease, and decreases in some inflammatory factors and thyroid hormones. According to the National Institute of Health, only a few studies have examined intermittent fasting. A 2018 review and current obesity report found that although the data suggests that intermittent fasting may be a promising weight loss method, trials have been of moderate sample size. There are some factors to consider before jumping into one of these, of course. I mean, obviously, don't just jump into a crazy-ass restricting, whole bunch of fasting. Weight loss the right way. How do you lose weight the right way? As with all diets, these two eating strategies are not the solution for sustained healthy weight loss. Everybody wants a magic answer. Today, I had a woman ask, blah, blah, okay, so this is what you need to do, okay? And this is what I encourage people to do, and this is what I do. I've done things like intermittent fasting, the WarriorDiet, etc., but you want to eat a balanced, nutritious diet in moderate amounts, engage in regular physical activity, drink alcohol moderately or not at all. Not at all is probably better. Don't smoke, maintain an active social lifestyle, get a good night's sleep. So let's go over those again. Now, this sounds an awful lot like the 9 primal whatever majiggers from, what's that gentleman's name? Liver King. Eat balanced, nutritious diet in moderate amounts, although it's different because he doesn't do that. He eats a lot of liver. Engage in regular physical activity. Drink alcohol moderately or not at all. Don't smoke, maintain an active social lifestyle, and get a good night's sleep. So, of course, there are benefits to intermittent fasting, okay? All forms of fasting reviewed here, alternate day fasting, the 5-2 diet, and time-restricted feeding produced mild to moderate weight loss. These regimens may benefit cardiometabolic health by decreasing blood pressure, insulin resistance, and oxidative stress, low-density lipoprotein, cholesterol, and so LDL cholesterol and triglyceride levels are also lowered, but findings are variable. Other health benefits such as improved appetite regulation and favorable changes in the diversity of the gut microbiome have also been demonstrated, but evidence for these effects is limited. Okay, so intermittent fasting is generally safe and does not result in energy level disturbances or increased disordered eating behaviors. In summary, intermittent fasting is a safe diet therapy that can produce clinically significant weight loss, 5% or more, and improve several markers of metabolic health. So Ramadan is probably something that people know about as one of the more popular, not popular, but one of the more well understood concepts of time-restricted feeding. Intermittent fasting and caloric restriction have been shown to extend life expectancy and reduce inflammation and cancer promotion in animal models. It was hypothesized that intermittent prolonged fasting practiced during the month of Ramadan could positively affect the inflammatory state. To investigate this hypothesis, a cross-sectional study was designed to investigate the impact of Ramadan intermittent fasting on selected inflammatory cytokines. Okay, so essentially the investigations were conducted 1 week before Ramadan fasting, at the end of the 3rd week of Ramadan, and 1 week after the cessation of the Ramadan month. The pro-inflammatory cytokines and tumor necrosis factor and diastolic blood pressure, body weight, and body fat percentage were significantly lower during Ramadan as compared with before Ramadan and after the cessation of Ramadan fasting. Immune cells significantly decreased during Ramadan, but still remained within the reference range changes. These results indicate that the Ramadan intermittent fasting, or what would technically be time-restricted feeding, attenuates inflammatory status of the body by suppressing pro-inflammatory cytokine expression, body fat, and circulating levels of leukocytes. What about Alzheimer's? The impairment of amyloid beta clearance in the brain plays a causative role in Alzheimer's disease. Polarity, distribution, blah, 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 is important, yada, yada. Increasing levels, okay. So, results, I skipped a lot of that because a lot of that's about immunochemistry and all this other stuff about how the study's done. But and again, anybody can go back and read this. This study is going to be linked in the description. During the treatment period, there were no abnormal signs in the mice except the one female, blah, blah, blah. Ameliorated the okay, so alternate day fasting ameliorated the cognitive dysfunction of the mice that were given the Alzheimer's disease via amyloid beta plaque. Okay, alternate day fasting protected against the increase of amyloid beta plaques in the cerebral cortex. Alternate day fasting alleviated the loss of alleviated the increase, okay. And I'm going to move on. What about fasting and cancer? Okay, fasting, cancer, molecular mechanisms, and clinical application. This is kind of where Dr. Walter Longo got a little bit of his start. If you study Dr. Longo's work, he would cut the calories of cancer patients, which would cause their cancer to go into remission. The vulnerability of cancer cells to nutrient deprivation and their dependency on specific metabolites are emerging hallmarks of cancer. Fasting or fasting-mimicking diets lead to wide alterations in growth factors and in metabolite levels, generating environments that can reduce the capability of cancer cells to adapt and survive, thus improving the effects of cancer therapies. In addition, fasting or fasting-mimicking diets increase resistance to chemotherapy in normal but not healthy cancer. In normal but not cancer cells. So when you're on a fasting mimicking diet, like the longevity diet or like the warrior diet, it seems that it would help increase resistance to chemotherapy for your normal healthy cells, but not for the cancer cells. And it promotes the regeneration in normal tissues, which could help prevent detrimental and potentially life-threatening side effects of the treatments. Okay. These are some of the figures here that showed, okay. And we're going to move on. So what are some of the emerging anti-aging strategies? Okay, number one, autophagy enhancement for facilitating successful aging. Autophagy is a lysosomal, so that's the lysosomes. They're like the trash men of your cells. They're the ones that recycle cellular waste. Okay, so lysosomal disintegration process, which is protective housekeeping machinery to get rid of damaged cell organelles, long-standing misfolded proteins, and colonizing pathogens. Autophagy shields the cells against stress through an activity that catabolizes intracellular elements to preserve energy homeostasis. Autophagy plays a significant role in the development and disease. Particularly enhancement of autophagy has been suggested to be useful for treating a variety of conditions, including metabolic disorders, neurodegenerative diseases, cancers, and infectious diseases. Dysfunctional autophagy also contributes to neurodegeneration, and intact autophagy function in neurons has a neuroprotective effect because autophagy facilitates the elimination of pathogenic forms of proteins such as as alpha-synuclein involved in Parkinson's disease or tau in Alzheimer's disease. In animal prototypes or of Parkinson's disease, treatment with autophagy enhancers such as rapamycin, lithium, and lithium engendered various favorable effects, which include diminished aggregation of that certain protein, oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, and neurodegeneration. Autophagy has a significant role in the modulation of the aging process. The function of autophagy in aging is apparent from numerous studies using yeasts, worms, flies, and mice that elevated expression of autophagy-related genes is a prerequisite for lifespan extension. Some studies have also shown that tissue-specific expression single autophagy gene is adequate for extending lifespan, whereas other studies have pointed out that distinct types of autophagy are critical for longevity as they specifically target dysfunctional cellular components and prevent their aberrant accumulation. Interestingly, slowdown of aging and longevity increase achieved through food deprivation and caloric restriction are facilitated through this is one of the ways calorie restriction works, is by upregulation of autophagy, because dampening autophagy diminishes the anti-aging outcomes of caloric restriction. Autophagy enhancers. Thus, autophagy enhancing interventions that commence in middle age would likely facilitate successful aging and increased longevity. However, it is debatable whether the enhancement of autophagy alone is sufficient to combat aging. Besides, the selectivity of autophagy enhancers is essential, as some proteins involved in upstream autophagy lysosomal pathway are also implicated in signaling pathways other than autophagy. Consequently, a wide-ranging stimulation of autophagy may result in dose-dependent side effects, which make them unsuitable for clinical transition. Senescent cell elimination. Amongst the perpetrators of organismal aging, the function of senescent cells has caught significant interest. Cellular senescence is typified by an irreversible cell cycle arrest, a resistance to apoptosis, and acquisition of pro-inflammatory tissue destructive senescence. Associated secretory phenotype, which can be engendered so it's secreting, again, these pro-inflammatory chemicals that signal to other cells to become inflamed, etc. So, for instance, a microbial infection can also stimulate cellular senescence because of their incapability to proliferate. Senescent cells cannot participate in standard tissue preservation and tissue repair. Rather, senescent cells disrupt the milieu of producing a plethora of bioactive factors that cause inflammation and impede regeneration. Senescent cells exhibiting the cell cycle inhibitory protein that actively propel spontaneously ensuing age-related tissue deterioration and thereby promote several diseases associated with aging. Indeed, patients with neurodegenerative diseases display various markers of senescence. The senescence-linked secretory phenotype can also promote metabolic dysregulation, stem cell dysfunction, and loss of resilience. Thus, it may be possible to defer, avert, or ameliorate multiple senescent-associated conditions just by delaying the accumulation of senescent cells or lessening the burden of senescent cells in several tissues and organs. Senescence is a common feature during the aging process, with an age-related increase in the number of senescent cells. The secretory phenotype of senescent cells fuels the chronic pro-inflammatory systemic state known as inflammaging. Inflammaging is one of the conspicuous features of aging, weakening the regenerative competence of stem cells and escalating the chance for developing age-related diseases. Furthermore, a study by Musi and colleagues has shown that tau protein aggregation is accompanied by cellular senescence in the brain. Additional characterization validated that senolytic drug treatment to tau transgenic mice with late-stage pathology resulted in reduced neurofibrillary tangle density, meaning less protein tangles, neuron loss and less neuron loss and less ventricular enlargement. These results suggest a link between the presence of neurofibrillary tangles and cellular senescence in the brain. Another study suggested a causal connection between the accrual of senescent cells and cognition. Transfusion of plasma from young individuals to promote successful aging. This is essentially a new procedure for limiting and reversing aspects of aging in various organs throughout the body is the transfusion of blood from young to the aged, as molecules circulating in young blood can rejuvenate the aging cells and tissues. I don't see this as a feasible thing unless we can start synthetically manufacturing young blood. Since prehistoric time periods, it has been believed that transfusion or consuming young blood or elements of young blood may rejuvenate the aging tissues and individuals. A procedure called parabiosis, studied in animal models, has revived the perception of young blood as an efficient drug for slowing aging and treating age-related diseases. Parabiosis, meaning living beside, is a procedure that anatomically joins two animals so that they share each other's circulatory system. Many studies have suggested that heterochronic parabiosis, which is joining an aged animal to a young animal, leads to a multitude of beneficial anti-aging effects. Factors in the young blood activated molecular signaling pathways and stem cells located in the liver, muscle, and brain of the old parabionte, which lead to, so in the older conjoined specimen, which lead to enhanced tissue regeneration. For example, transfusion of young blood from a young animal to an aged animal, enhanced adult neurogenesis, as well as synaptic plasticity in the aged brain. Additional studies suggested that several soluble factors underlie the rejuvenating effects of the young blood, the growth differentiation factor, blah, blah, blah. Another study analyzed the effects of heterochronic parabiosis of Alzheimer's disease transgenic mice with young, healthy mice. Circulation of blood from young mice into aged mice did not reduce the deposition of beta amyloid or microglial activation. However, the procedure reversed the loss of synapses. To validate the benefits of infusion of plasma collected from younger individuals for treating aged individuals or individuals with Alzheimer's disease, careful placebo-controlled larger clinical trials will be required. Several issues, blah, blah, blah. Intermittent fasting as a means to combat aging. Diet and eating schemes have a significant influence on the pathogenesis of many age-associated diseases, which can be gleaned from both epidemiological and experimental studies. For example, one of the most efficient non-genetic dietary interventions that can enhance longevity is calorie restriction, involving reducing caloric intake by about 20 to 40%, but you'll remember only 10% is really necessary. A study on the dietary intake of adults living in Okinawa, Japan, having nearly 5 times higher number of centenarians than any other part of the world, revealed that Okinawans consumed 17% fewer calories, so only 70% than the average adult in Japan, and 40% less calories than the average adult in the United States. Many investigations in animal prototypes have demonstrated that reduced food intake leads to increased lifespan. The other beneficial effects include improved gut microbiota composition and metabolome, reduced age-related methylation, changes in the brain, increased adult neurogenesis, improved cognitive function, protection against age-related neurodegenerative disorders such as dementia. Recently, many studies have shown that intermittent fasting can have a similar effect as calorie restriction. Benefits related to cardiovascular health include protection of heart against ischemic injury, reduced body mass index and blood lipids, improved glucose tolerance, and lower incidence of coronary artery disease. The positive effects of intermittent fasting on brain health in preclinical studies comprised improved cognitive function with reduced oxidative stress during middle age. With intermittent fasting, when intermittent fasting was commenced in young adult age, and delayed occurrence of age-related brain impairments. Moreover, in models of ischemic stroke, intermittent fasting modulated forebrain neurogenesis, autophagy, and apoptosis, attenuated inflammasome activity, suppressed detrimental genetic pathways, and improved recovery. Intermittent fasting was also found to be efficient for reducing neuroinflammation and preserving cognitive function after lipopolysaccharide administration, an animal model of systemic bacterial infection. Furthermore, intermittent fasting ameliorated behavioral deficits, in Alzheimer's disease mice if increased, in turn inhibit the increase of brain-derived lipoprotein lipase. A recent study showed intermittent fasting improves tissue function and overall health during aging in fruit flies. This study demonstrated that just 1 month of 2-day, fed, 5-day fasted intermittent fasting regime at the beginning of adulthood is adequate to extend lifespan. Additional analysis revealed that intermittent fasting enhanced resistance to starvation, oxidative and xenobiotic stress, and higher lipid content. And this again mentions the warrior diet. Where did I just see that? The warrior diet involves starvation during the day and eating a huge meal at night. However, it is currently unclear which one among these diverse types of intermittent fasting promotes maximal benefits. So you can see that the warrior diet has actually appeared in research. Now, it's actually my personal opinion, and I'm going to get into why when I talk about the triage theory of aging and disease, but it's my opinion that actually the what's called optimal nutrition aspect of caloric restriction with optimal nutrition might actually be more important than the caloric restriction aspect. So, an overview, CRON, calorie restriction with optimal nutrition, as I see, blah, 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 Practicing CRON. CRON is a lifestyle, not a diet. You change permanently, and this is what I promote. I promote caloric restriction with optimal nutrition. I think it's the only way to go. It's the most well-researched, and it's the one that shows the best results and has the most meaty information about it. It has the most massive information. Not just a short-term weight loss program. However, as your weight gets closer to optimum, focus shifts increasingly from cutting calories to improving nutrition. In my opinion, you really need to focus first and foremost on improving nutrition, and then worry. Because you'll remember I talked about how diet quality affects the hallmarks of aging, and I'm going to do that in the second video. I think I'm going to talk about how the quality of a diet actually helps to retard the aging process. So, make CRON fun, blah, 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 debunking some major misconceptions about CRON. CRON does not have to be difficult or unpleasant, or as detractors like to say, a longer life not worth living. Quite the opposite. A sound approach to CRON will increase one's appreciation of food and generally lead to a better quality of life. Hunger does not have to be an issue. Many people on CRON actually struggle to eat 1,500 calories. Feeling too full. A lot of this has to do with what you're eating on a CRON diet. When you're eating high fiber foods, high protein foods, you're eating a lot of bulk. And you're satisfied because your blood sugar isn't all over the place. It's stabilized with what you're eating. CRON is not an all or nothing thing. This counters the objection that severe CRON is just too difficult or impractical, or that one can't do certain sports or look buff or whatever. Benefits are proportional to the degree of restriction/nutrition. In fact, for most people, the greatest risk reduction percentage occurs with reasonably modest CRON. And I think that's important to understand. When you start going too low on calories, and I did this recently about 2 years ago. I started losing my hair and things of that nature. You don't want to go too low. You want to stay modest, and I'm going to show why I believe that. That's my belief, but it does seem that modestly reducing calories is where you're going to have the best results. CRON does not have to be a lot of trouble. You don't have to spend hours shopping for special foods and preparing them. Most CRON foods are readily available at your local supermarket. Okay, and that's very important. What are you eating on a cron diet? Fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, things of that nature. Whole grains. It's not crazy stuff. Cron is about limiting calories and minimizing harmful substances while maximizing nutrients. What makes foods best meet this criteria? Most important, lots and lots of low-calorie, high-nutrient, and high-fiber vegetables. Secondly, fruit. Then small amounts of fish, lean meat, or other protein like nuts and beans, soy, egg white, etc. Try to eliminate beverages containing sugar. Herbal teas are better. Dramatically reduce processed foods. Okay, it's very easy to do this. So, beans and rice are good. Pasta and bread are borderline, relatively high in calories, blah, blah, blah. And like I said, settling on a legume-centered diet, you got a lot of fiber there. What are the safe, healthy limits to calorie restriction? Not much research has been done, but a number of fairly simple points emerge. If you feel weak, faint, or more tired than usual, you are probably overdoing it. So keep that in mind. If you feel like crap, you're probably overdoing it. If your BMI drops below 18.5 or your body fat below 5%, or 8% if you're a female, you are probably close to the limit. What other risks and disadvantages are there? Feeling cold more easily, having difficulty sitting comfortably because you don't have all the fat that you would, being hungry a lot while in the weight loss phase. I don't believe in these phases. I believe, if you're going to restrict calories, lose the weight slowly. And maybe 10%. Don't go crazy with how much you restrict your calories. What do we know about calorie restriction? Okay. What are the different forms of calorie restriction? Okay. You may have heard about calorie restriction, blah, blah, blah. These eating patterns are being studied as possible ways to maintain good health and live longer. They are not temporary weight loss plans. Now remember, this is from the National Institute of Health. These are not temporary weight loss plans. Interest in their potential health and aging benefits stems from decades of research with a variety of animals, including worms, crabs, snails, fruit flies, and rodents. In many experiments, calorie-restricted feeding delayed the onset of age-related disorders, and in some studies, extended lifespan. Given these results, in animals, researchers are studying if and how caloric restriction or a fasting diet affects health and lifespan in people. Many studies have shown that obese and overweight people who lose weight by dieting can improve their health, but scientists still have much to learn about how calorie restriction and fasting affect people who are not overweight, including older people. Okay, what are the different forms of calorie restriction? Again, time-restricted feeding, alternate day fasting, 5-2, blah, blah, blah. What's the evidence from animal studies? More animal research has been done on calorie restriction than on fasting. In some experiments, calorie restriction is also a form of fasting because the lab animals consume all their daily allotted food within hours. Okay. What's the evidence from human studies? Some studies suggest that calorie restriction may have health benefits for humans, but more research is needed. Some people have voluntarily practiced extreme degrees of calorie restriction over the many years in the belief that it will extend their lifespan or preserve health. Studies on these individuals have found markedly low levels of risk factors for cardiovascular disease and diabetes. Okay. Calorie restriction, the reduction of dietary intake below energy requirements while maintaining optimal nutrition, is the only known nutritional intervention with the potential to attenuate aging. Evidence from observational, preclinical, and clinical trials suggests the ability to increase lifespan by 1 to 5 years with an improvement in health span and quality of life. Calorie restriction moderates intrinsic processing of aging through cellular and metabolic adaptations and reducing risk for the development of many cardiometabolic diseases. Yet implementation of calorie restriction may require unique considerations for the elderly and other specific populations. Now I'm going to actually end this video here because I don't want to make the video too long, And then I'm going to continue with a part 2. And I'm going to start part 2 with this. Here's human implications of caloric restrictions, effects on aging in laboratory animals, an overview of opportunities for research. That's what I'm going to start my next video with. And that's all for this video.